In the early hours of June 28, 1969, the New York City Police raided one of the most popular gay bars, the Stonewall Inn, located in Greenwich Village. After the raid, many members of the LGBTQ community protested, rose up, and took the responsibility to fight for their rights. The Stonewall Uprisings have impacted many people's lives. Now, people in the LGBTQ community have the right to marry and love whomever they wish. But before we get to that, we have to go back to the beginning.
Before the uprising, things around New York City were extremely different, starting with the fact that, in the late 1800s, the LGBTQ community was actually thriving, with many members of the LGBTQ community coming out to society and attending pansy balls in which cross-dressing and dancing with the same sex was allowed. However, this came to an end when, in the early 1900s, the LGBTQ community began facing backlash and discrimination. For instance, beginning in 1917, many bans were created that denied the rights of LGBTQ people, such as banning them from joining the army and refusing to serve them at restaurants. Also, numerous raids occurred in many LGBTQ bars around New York because in 1964, Robert Wagner, the mayor of New York at the time, shut down many gay establishments before the World Fair, which is a global exhibition to showcase the progress each nation has made. He claimed that he wanted to clean up the city in time for the upcoming fair, which gave the law enforcement a false sense of responsibility to initiate more raids on the existing bars. In a future interview with Virginia Apuzzo, a lesbian and an LGBTQ rights activist, she claimed that it was free, but not quite free enough for us. There was no place for us yet. It just wasn't there. Adding to that, in April of 1952, homosexuality was listed as a mental illness and was classified as a sociopathic personality disturbance by the American Psychiatric Association. Plus, to top it off, although it was not entirely illegal to be homosexual, it was de facto illegal, which means that it was widely considered to be a crime. You could be arrested for wearing less than 3 articles of clothing that matched your birth gender, which was referred to as the 3-article rule.
Adding to that, there are many other events to add fuel to the soon-to-be fire that had taken place in New York. One of the previous events that had taken place before Stonewall were the closings of several other LGBTQ bars such as the Telestar and the Checkerboard. The majority of these LGBTQ establishments were owned by the Mafia, including the Stonewall Inn. Some of the corrupt cops would accept bribes from them to look the other way when they were selling alcohol without permit and supporting homosexuality, which, as we know, was de facto illegal at the time. Where most folks saw crime, the Mafia saw a golden business opportunity. The original owner of the Stonewall Inn was named Tony Lauria, or also commonly known as Fat Tony of the Genovese crime family. Fat Tony bought the building in 1966 and renovated it into a bar. A year later, in 1967, the Stonewall Inn was opened as a private gay establishment in order to keep undercover cops from entering the bar. In an interview with David Carter, he stated that, in the mid-1960s, there was only one well-known gay neighborhood in the United States, and that was Greenwich Village. Partially because of its popularity, there were numerous raids on Stonewall that took place about once a month. On occasion, the patrons at the bar would fight back, but it was never enough. One of these raids took place on the 24th of June, the Tuesday before the raid on Stonewall. The police confiscated alcohol and arrested a few of the Stonewall employees. In a future interview with Deputy Inspector Seymour Pine, he says that the day before the uprising, on June 27th, the cops didn't think that the bar patrons would do anything. Pine said, "We knew what we planned to do. We planned to take it apart. The police planned to show that the New York City Police Department was not powerless, but the only way to do that was to close down the bar."
Then, on the day of the event, June 28, 1969, at approximately 1:20 a.m., the police began a raid on the Stonewall Inn. Several police officers showed up at the bar, including Deputy Inspector Seymour Pine, and upon arriving, blocked off the door to prevent anyone from leaving without being checked. Once the police cars and paddy wagons arrived, the employees were signaled out for arrest, since they didn't have a permit to sell alcohol. A few patrons that were cross-dressing were arrested as well, because they had broken the 3-article rule. Due to the fact that these raids were such a common occurrence, the patrons and other onlookers in the area were getting fed up with the constant disrespect. The LGBTQ community, specifically the bar patrons, were growing tired of the constant raids that were conducted on the bar. When Stormy DeLavier, one of the cross-dressers that the police were taking in, was forcibly shoved back into a police car after having slipped out twice already. Many believed that something was triggered in the growing crowd, and that Stormy DeLavier's outburst was why the bar patrons decided it was time to fight back.
Some of the bar patrons that were being taken by the police began resisting arrest, and other participants started throwing pennies, dimes, rocks, bottles, and other such items, all the while shouting insults at the police. It escalated to the point where the officers had to barricade themselves in the bar and call for reinforcements. That didn't stop the crowd, however, as they continued yelling, and some attempted to break down the door and windows, while others tried to set fire to the bar. This whole event took around just 45 minutes to an hour, ending with the arrival of more police cars and the protesters getting dispersed. This photograph was taken after the raid on Stonewall occurred, which gives us a visual of the inside of the bar. There were many people who participated in the Stonewall Uprising, but one of the two more well-known figures was Marsha P. Johnson. In a quote from Marsha P. Johnson, she says, "I was no one, nobody from Nowheresville until I became a drag queen." Sylvia Rivera was another one of the two more well-known figures. She states herself that, "Hell hath no fury like a drag queen scorned." Both of them were self-identified drag queens and gay activists.
The night after the raid, despite being torn apart during the uprising, the Stonewall Inn opened for business again, though they didn't sell any alcohol. Over the course of the day, more supporters of LGBTQ rights began showing up to protest. Because of this, New York City's riot police showed up to get the protesters under control again. In spite of that, they continued protesting, even after parts of the crowd were tear-gassed and beaten. They protested for 6 days and 5 nights. In a future interview, Virginia Apuzzo said, "I've never lost my sense of outrage, righteous outrage, at injustice. Somebody else had enough of this hiding, enough of this being pushed back, enough of this swallowing and not breathing." Many people back then and nowadays refer to this event as the Stonewall Riots. However, quite a few of the participants disagree that it was not a riot. A quote from Stormy DeLavier even states herself that, "It was a rebellion. It was a civil rights disobedience. It wasn't no damn riot." This event brought so many people together and got them all fighting for one common interest: equal rights for the LGBTQ community and an end to the oppression they were facing. The protesters took the responsibility to fight for their rights.
Over the years that followed the Stonewall Uprising, a lot of things occurred and many things have changed. Numerous new LGBTQ organizations were created, such as the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Activists Alliance. A year after the uprising was the first Pride Parade on June 28, 1970, the anniversary of the raid on Stonewall. Because of the renewed effort, the following year showed continued improvement in the rights of LGBTQ people. On December 15, 1973, a vote was passed by the American Psychiatric Association that homosexuality would be removed from the list of mental illness. Then, just a few years later, in 1977, Harvey Milk became one of the first openly gay Americans to be elected into public office, but was assassinated just a year later in 1978. In the year 2000, the Stonewall Inn was registered as a National Historic Site and became a New York City landmark in 2015. And finally, on June 24, 2015, after the case of Obergefell versus Hodges, the U.S. Congress declared same-sex marriages to be legal in all 50 states. We have a whole Pride Month now, which was first officially recognized in 1999. The events of Stonewall have greatly improved the lives for LGBTQ people because, while there is still much discrimination, queer people can now be who they are, dress how they want, and marry whomever they choose regardless of gender. Although many people have benefited from the uprisings, things are still not entirely equal. There is still tons of discrimination and hate towards the LGBTQ community, and they still continue to fight for their rights today.
In conclusion, the Stonewall Uprising was game-changing, and it has been very important in building the world we know today. In a quote from Marsha P. Johnson, she asks, "How many years has it taken people to realize that we are all brothers and sisters and human beings in the human race?" Before the uprising, the LGBTQ community had little to no rights at all. When the police raided the bar on June 28th, the LGBTQ community finally had enough of this treatment, and they rose up. The LGBTQ community took the responsibility and fought for their rights. The Stonewall Uprising has inspired many and changed the lives of all.